There are people whose lives dominate a time. We think of them usually as world figures walking the stage of history, reacting to the forces of their time. That's how we've been taught. There are others, however, nowhere near as historically commanding, that either initiate a new perception or reignite an older one, and in so doing create a line of self-questioning whose destination is not so apparent, but which issues a direct challenge to what has been the consensus belief. Such a figure for me, and some 8 million others who have read his books, is Carlos Castaneda. By the sheer force of his connection with intent, Castaneda brought to life and inseminated into Western culture an age-old source of perspective long ago rendered insensible by the modern world's pursuit of rationality. The brilliance of his early near-archetypal renderings of non-ordinary reality clash with his accrued reputation as a manipulator, liar, and trickster. And that, no doubt, is the way he would have wanted it. He leaves us in not knowing, in questioning. Like many of those whom he has deeply touched, I did not know him or know anyone who did. Yet he excited my imagination and lived in me for a time. The story he told of his apprenticeship to a man of knowledge played its part in leading me to a path of self-transformation. Ultimately, the path was quite different from his, though, as I now see, very much the same, but not in the way one would suspect. I was first introduced to Castaneda when I was working as a part-time bartender in Remington's, a underground bar in the village, and Larry Poons, a well-known painter of the time, came in and was exclaiming about a book that he had read. It was like no other. I went right out and I bought The Teachings of Don Juan. I was totally taken with it. What Castaneda was saying was coming from another level entirely. I devoured it. It was right there with him through his second and third books, A Separate Reality and A Journey to Ixtlan, as Don Juan brought him deeper and deeper into experiencing non-ordinary reality. But his next books seemed forced in some way the others hadn't. The narrative that had been so poetic and incisive suddenly seemed weighted. The dialogue, once so dimensional, metaphorical, sometimes mythological, seemed stilted. The information was still there, but the magic was gone. What Castaneda did do for me was nurture the wish that someday I would meet my own Don Juan. And as it happens more often than we realize, I did, though not in the desert of Sonora, but a Manhattan skyscraper. What is the meaning of life? Why do we exist? What is the purpose, if any? Those were the questions Castaneda's drug experiences and entry into non-ordinary reality evoked for me. It wasn't an insistent, burning question. I was too self-absorbed for that. But his experiences put the question on the table. What was the sense of doing anything if at death it was all taken away from you? With this question still faintly alive in me, one twilight evening, sitting on the stoop of an old brownstone, a friend unexpectedly rolled a joint and offered me a hit, and I accepted. Though I didn't smoke, didn't much drink, and didn't use drugs of any type, even aspirin. Soon after, though my sense of time suddenly elongated, an old Slavic woman and a babushka hurried down the street, suddenly stopped to talk. At one point, she asked me to feel the side of her head. When I put out my hand, she grabbed it and pushed my fingers against her temple. My fingers went right inside her head. It was all mush, no bone. The shock sent a shiver right through my whole body. "I've had a lobotomy," she said, and laughed. And still laughing, she toddled off. I couldn't know it then, but this prefigured in its way what was going to happen. Soon after, a A fellow came to run an ad in a magazine I had at the time in New York and told me that he was on acid. And I said, well, I thought when you were on acid you met the devil or went off flying. Or he said, no, it's not like that at all. Would you like to try it? I said, well, all right. He said, I'm having a party tonight, and why don't you come? Well, Kevin lived in a penthouse. He ran a model agency. So the people who were there looking out over the East River were all quite beautiful and all quite stoned, though I couldn't know that at the time. Kevin handed me a tiny azure pill, which I immediately swallowed. A half hour or so went by. Nothing happened. Maybe it's a dud, I thought, and asked for another. But no sooner had I swallowed the second pill than this queasy feeling hit my stomach, and then pure perception. No overlay, no description, no leveling. There was only seeing, being in the immediate. I saw, or rather it saw, everyone my eyes focused on, in dimension, like folds of an accordion that suddenly stretched full out. People's emotional and psychological states were seen, not only in the present, but also as they had been before. Marveling at this, a thought shot into my head. You're so relaxed, you must be dead. You must be dead. Like a thought bullet, it hit the mind and lodged there. I tried to get rid of it, think of something else, but the thought stayed. It had implanted itself. In the struggle to get rid of it, the pores of my body opened. All my energy began spilling out. I grew so weak I had to lie on the floor. Kevin came over and knelt down beside me. What's happening? He asked. I told him about the thought frozen in my head. I couldn't get it out. I was really worried. I thought I was going to die. No, he said softly with a knowing smile. You're not dead. You've just been reborn. The words clicked. They made coherent what I was feeling but couldn't have formulated. The words were like magic. They reassembled all the parts of me together again. I stayed throughout the night. Words formed themselves in the immediacy of experiencing. I wrote them down. We are energy. Energy never dies. It simply passes into new forms, completes old circles. Feelings are energy patterns. Good feelings are harmonious energy patterns. Sex is interacting energy. Bodies are changing covers. Love is the oneness of two consciousnesses that know that they are energy. I thought I was going to be like this the rest of my life. But the next morning, walking home, suddenly there was a sensation of a familiar gait, a slight hunch of the shoulders. Not through thought, but through the body, Patterson had returned. Amazing. I went home and crashed. When I woke up, I was back in the old consciousness. The only change was that the body felt really wasted. The difference between the experiencing of having once been so wide and deep and now so narrow and shallow had left an imprint and created a question. If I can do this on drugs, how can I do it naturally? A few weeks later, I read P.D. Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. The ideas were clear, precise, practical, of great scale. There was no personalization, no sorcerer twist that I got with Castaneda. The ideas were said to come from a conscious level of humanity. They were even sharper, deeper, of greater scale than Don Juan's. The ideas set my mind and feelings on fire. But then the company I'd sold in New York my magazine to, they went bankrupt. I was just another creditor. The magazine had been my life. All my dreams destroyed. I was left with nothing. I still walked around talking and acting like everyone else, but inside I had died. Only then, at the lowest point in my life, paradoxically but also necessarily, did I meet my Don Juan. He was not a Yaqui Indian, but a British businessman, a lord no less, whose office, the American British Electric Corporation, the hunting group of companies, was in Rockefeller Center. That meeting and my Don Juan telling me that drugs weakened the will and cultivated imagination and fantasy in the higher emotional center ended whatever interest was left in Castaneda and his world. But it had shown me that, looking from our ordinary point of view, consciousness had many levels, but nothing is free. There was always a payment. Without knowing it, I was looking for a hit. But consciousness isn't a hit. It took a lot of self-observation to realize the assumption hidden in my question. If I can do this on drugs, how can I do it naturally? This presupposed that there was an indivisible I, that this Patterson, which I took myself to be, was going to do this. Some 28 years passed, and I never gave a thought to Carlos Castaneda. But then he died, and shortly afterward, his major book was published, The Active Side of Infinity. The Active Side of Infinity. What a great title. What did it mean? I wondered what he had come to, our paths apparently being so different. I had heard that Castaneda had spent a weekend with my Don Juan at a retreat. Then I read that Castaneda had met the Nagual woman, Carol Tiggs, when she was a student. When in Los Angeles, I visited his compound, as he called it, his house in Westwood, and found it enclosed by 12-foot hedges. At the site of Ship's Restaurant, the scene after Castaneda's jump into the abyss, I found only a towering pole remained, with its symbol of a rocket flying into space. My interest piqued, I began rereading his books, and now the hidden correspondences between his ideas and those I had studied and practiced suddenly became apparent. The years were becoming full circle. This book, The Life and Teachings of Carlos Castaneda, presumptuous as the title may sound, is my journey back into his world. It is by no means definitive, but it does represent what I have learned of this enigmatic, highly gifted, and guilt-ridden man of sorceric mystery, whose experiences of non-ordinary reality in the deserts of Sonora and the streets of Los Angeles so powerfully reinserted the idea of the sorceric, shamanic warrior into our modern world. Inner silence. Whenever there's a stop, our thoughts become more vivid. But what if there were no thoughts? That would be inner silence, which is a chief tenet of Carlos Castaneda's teaching. As he says, nothing happens, really, without inner silence. And to do that, we have to stop the world. What's he mean by that? How could you stop the world? Obviously, the world is in action, as it's always been and always will be, supposedly. So it's not outside, but inside. If we could redirect the attention from the head brain, or the foreign implantation, as Mr. Castaneda speaks about, into the body, where we would come to have what he calls a total body, then we would no longer be feeding the foreign implantation, which Mr. Gurdjieff calls the formatory mind. And the redirection of the energy out of the formatory mind into the body and being able to sustain that is what Mr. Gurdjieff calls self-remembering. The experience of self-remembering is to become whole. The real definition of religion is wholeness. We're not whole as long as we're in the formatory mind, because we're constantly doing what? Talking to ourselves about how things are going, how other people are doing. Basically, it's me, 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 continuously. No matter what the situation, I'm always talking to myself about me in some way. And so to end that, to stop the world, would be to redirect the attention into the body. Because what's feeding the foreign implantation, the formatory mind, is one's attention. So if we take the attention away from the formatory mind, then there's a stillness. One can even speak in a stillness. It doesn't mean that you're rendered incapacitated. You can no longer speak if you're in inner silence. But you're no longer talking to yourself. Those are some of the basic ideas that he put forth. Yeah.
What you say I've never heard before, but I wonder if Castaneda is still relevant, if he still plays a part in today's life.
Well, everything has taken a great dip, you know, the 60s, 70s, the early 80s. We're now in a very contracted, materialistic world where conscious survival on one level or another is the question of the day. Or I shouldn't say conscious survival, just survival. How am I going to keep what I have, right? But what he was talking about, the non-ordinary reality and the means to get there and sustain that, and the experiences one can have, are age-old. And while the interest is certainly not as high as when he was alive, there still is an interest. And hopefully with this book, the people who read it will see the correspondence between Castaneda's ideas and the Gurdjieff work. That, in my opinion, what he did was take the Gurdjieff ideas and give them a sorceric twist. And suddenly, the line between Gurdjieff and Don Juan was suddenly blurred. If you take the idea, for example, as I said, foreign implantation, Gurdjieff speaks about an implantation in the body that makes us see the world upside down. That is, I see the world strictly from my own subjective point of view, which I constantly reinforce by thinking about myself, talking about myself, etc., etc. Yeah.
In what way do you think Castaneda is derivative of Gurdjieff?
I think what happened with Castaneda is he did meet a Don Juan. And he was introduced into the sorceric reality through drugs. And this is shown in the first 3 books. Then Don Juan either died or left him. And what was he to do? He only had part of a teaching. So we know that when he decided to close up shop, as it were, in 1973, he was on the cover March 8th of Time magazine. Can you believe that, huh? He disappeared from view. Well, what did he do? Well, one of the things he did was he went to San Anselmo, the home of the Gurdjieff work in San Francisco, and spent a weekend with my teacher, Lord John Pentland. And there, as I say, met Carol Tiggs and explored the teaching. He also went and interviewed Swami Muktananda and a number of other people. He was looking to put some ground under his experiences. And I think the primary ground is the Gurdjieff work. If you read the book, you'll see it. I go through his ideas and the Gurdjieff ideas side by side. Just for example, his idea of the predatorial universe. This is what Mr. Gurdjieff calls reciprocal maintenance. Well, you see what happens? A predatorial universe. You're going to be eaten up, right? You've got to battle against this. Rather than a reciprocal maintenance of one thing feeding another thing, of a bee flying into a hollyhock and taking that honey and moving it to another flower and what have you, and that budding and so forth. One could see it, I guess, as predatorial from the flower's point of view, if it did have one. But it's a sorceric way of looking at reality that makes reality exciting. It makes it another action film. Yes, there are thrills and spills and a lot of mystery and what have you. But when you really begin to examine his idea of non-ordinary reality, it is the psychic world. It's not the spiritual world. It's the psychic world. And most people don't make that differentiation or make it when it's too late, when they've already entered into the sorceric, shamanic world of invisible spirits and beings and so forth and so on. It isn't that they don't exist, it's just that the level at which you're encountering them is simply the materialistic, dualistic reality that we're all in now, and just moving it up a level, that's all. It's not spiritual. And as we can see from Castaneda's life, you know, that one could easily say his life is really not spiritual, it's sorceric. He was fighting to the end and having the witches, you know, commit suicide to follow him, just like the Hale-Bopp comet and Heaven's Gate. Those people left to get on the comet, right? And a number of them were very intelligent. These were not dummies, right? They were intelligent people. Some of them could be you. Better watch out. Anything I've said somebody doesn't understand or would like me to comment further on or would like to challenge or, yeah.
What does Castaneda mean by talking about the warrior erasing personal history?
If you erase personal history, you'll become invisible to other people. But you'll have to stop talking to yourself, because that keeps you on the level of ordinary reality and the consensus activity of everybody talking to themselves. One of the beginning ways of erasing personal history is what Carlos Castaneda calls recapitulation, and what Mr. Gurdjieff calls telling the story of your life, recapitulating it. He even uses the word, you know. What happens with the drug experience, for example, I had, you know, it's like a hatchet comes down and suddenly splits you, and you're in this world now, but you have no training, right? And you're open to everything, right? And people get trapped there. People go crazy there. As my Don Juan said, it encourages fantasy, imagination in higher emotional center. So if you believe that you have met the devil, because your belief is so strong, reality will correspond immediately, right? And you will react in a biodynamic way to this is the devil. So then when you come down to ordinary reality, you've got the imprint of this judgment, of this fantasy, what have you, and it's very difficult to get rid of. We could all agree that there is a book and a glass on the table. Anyone who didn't agree with that, well, they have a problem, because everybody here, I would assume, would admit that. But that I saw the devil, How could you disprove that, right? And how could I prove it, right? But connected with that is the idea of self-importance. Not only am I talking to myself all the time about myself and how well I'm doing and whether I'm one up or one down with other people and so forth, totally egocentric. I'm also polishing my life, polishing my story, dropping little bits off that just don't seem to work with my self-image, right? And so there's a rewriting of history going on constantly.
What is the natural way?
The natural way is simply to use what you have and begin to use that in a way that can bring you to a deeper and higher level of vibration so that you're not wasted, so that you don't go into imagination. If you remember yourself, you're not going into imagination. You're seeing yourself as you are. Now, you may identify and tell yourself lies about that, but instead of working through the idea of yourself, you're actually encountering yourself in the moment as you are manifesting. And that is usually far different than what I think I am. So that tends to loosen all the bolts of the false personality, so that in time what shines through is essence, real personality, a higher vibration, and, as I said in the beginning, inner silence. You stop talking to yourself because you're no longer concerned with your self-importance. You have seen through what that is. But seeing through it is a death. And so the closer you get to your death, the more obstacles you will put in your way. So, as Mr. Gurdjieff says, the first barrier is sincerity. I must learn to be sincere. Because the closer I get to the truth on any level, the more likely I am to obstruct it, lie about it, so forth and so on. So all the virtues that we talk about are not, their basis is not societal conditioning. Their basis is in holiness, wholeness, consciousness. You can't get to the truth through a lie. If you could, think what a strange world it would be, right? But when we say natural, who's defining natural, right? What one person takes as natural to another person is not so natural. If you were a Maori in New Zealand or Cook's Island, you'd be probably sitting here with your face tattooed. That would be natural to you, right?
Is it really possible to raise one's level of vibrations without drugs? Because drugs really waste you.
See, what do we all want, right? If we really, shave everything down, isn't one of the things we want is other people's attention? Some people will do anything to get other people's attention, right? Most people in business are in business for the power, but also for attention, right? You're the captain of industry. Everyone, oh wow, right? Well, why do we want other people's attention? I have attention. Why do I want somebody else's attention? It's because I'm not giving myself attention. I'm totally projected outside myself. It's only when you come into the body, can remember yourself and sustain that, that you can share your attention with other people, but you don't need it. If you need somebody's attention, they have control over you. Why do we want anyone to have control over us? We don't, of course, but they do. Because I'm not giving myself attention. I'm not sitting in my own seat. I'm sitting there being in the mind, right? Listening, judging, what's that mean, so forth and so on. I'm still in the formatory mind. That's unnatural, though it is natural in a consensus way. That everybody is talking to themselves. And everybody has been talking to themselves probably ever since the caveman came in and started telling about this huge giraffe he saw, which he couldn't name. You've got to come out and see it. See what I saw. You know, St. Francis has a beautiful line in his prayer, you know, seek to understand and not to be understood.
These inner voices are always talking. I find it's almost impossible to come to inner silence.
It does seem that way, but that's to the formatory mind. The moment I shift the attention out of the formatory mind into the feet, we could do this now. You know, this is an experiment that can take place within your own body. Nothing is demanded other than you work with your attention. Shift your attention into your feet. Sustain it there. You can still hear the speaker. Why do you have to be in the head listening? Why can't you be in the feet listening? Because what happens if you sustain this is the head becomes more spacious. The impressions become more vivid. They're not filtered through the talking mind. And so you enter in then, potentially, to the experience I had on acid of looking at somebody and just seeing exactly where they were and where they were before that. It wasn't knowledge in the sense that we think about knowledge. It's immediacy. Once you raise the level of your vibration and come into a new energy band, since everyone is energy, then you will see where they are relative to their energy. And most people are not in their energy unless they're identified in one way or another, trying to do something or not do something, right? But to just be with your energy, right? Without having to do anything, prove anything, that can lift you to a non-ordinary level of reality that has nothing to do with drugs. He speaks in the early interviews that he gave, for instance with Sam Keen in Psychology Today, about being in the total body, right? I believe what happened to him was the drug experience was so shattering, right, that it did turn the ignition switch on in terms of his whole body. Remember, he had a tremendous amount of energy to begin with. And then he got involved with a Taoist, I think, Mr. Lee, and started practicing these various movements. And he had been to the Gurdjieff movements. And like with everything, tensegrity was what he called his work with the body, sort of was a melange of all these different ways, right? But that was to keep the energy heightened, right? Because the tendency is to always contract. The level of energy is not, it's dynamic, it's changing. It isn't on one level all the time, right? So it can easily go into a descending octave, if Mr. Gurdjieff speaks, or to be on an ascending octave, to know where the shocks are and what have you. So when he decided to bring the teaching out into the open, you know, what's he going to do? Have a seminar in which he just talks about Don Juan? I mean, after a few hours, what's he have to say? So tensegrity was a good way to involve the witches. It really started with the witches, these three women, and then evolved from there. And I think it's still going on, especially, interestingly enough, in Russia and Germany and Spain. You know, in '68, when the Teachings of Don Juan was first published, it ran like wildfire through this culture and many others, and led people to take drugs and go to the Sonora Desert and try to find their Don Juan. I believe there was a lot of pressure on Carlos Castaneda to change his orientation from drugs. The sorceric and shamanic way is based, to one degree or another, on drugs. I believe he took no drugs after that, but he introduced the culture to drug taking, or helped to.
You just said that the shamanic way is a way of drugs. That's what a lot of people think, but it's not really true.
Right. Well, something happened here with the word sorcery and shamanism. Shamanism is a word that's indigenous to the Asiatic Siberian culture.
Yeah, there's shamans all over the world, just not Mexico.
It's how you define the words, all right? Sorcery is, if you look it up in the dictionary, has an evil connotation. Right?
In English?
Well, that's the only dictionary I know. I don't think, if you look at the books, he keeps moving between sorcery, shamanism, and the Toltec. Now, in 1951, Ivanovitch wrote a book on shamanism and ecstasy. That was in French. It wasn't published in English until the early 60s. That changed everything. Up to that time, anthropologists were not looking at the tribes in the Amazon, etc., as shamans. Today, we have so many people giving shamanic workshops. Well, why don't they give sorceric workshops, right? Because the idea of sorcery has an evil connotation. The shamanic idea is indigenous to the culture, in which the shaman helps the community in terms of finding out why there is a disease, prophecy, etc. But what Castaneda, and healing. Castaneda was not involved in healing. He was involved in traveling and seeing. So he wasn't a shaman by definition. Now you can change the definition, but if you go back to the definitions that are ordinarily held by the academics, shamanism was an Asiatic manifestation. It wasn't in South America and what have you. Now it is. Everything is shamanic. So there's a real confluence of ideas that make conversation impossible, because somebody's talking about shamanism, another person's talking about sorcery, and another person's talking about the Toltecs. Well, think about it. If everyone here stopped talking to themselves about themselves, then there would be an openness. Then there would be a recognition of vibration. Then more feeling would come in. and it wouldn't be personalized. And so there would be a much deeper level of harmony, because you wouldn't be striving to be something you're not, or wanting other people's attention, and so forth and so on. So it would be lovely if it could be true that everybody would be interested in self-transformation. But that has never been the case, and it's not likely to be the case now. So I don't think we're going to have any great worries about a lot of people living harmonious lives.
But isn't transformation striving to be something you're not?
No, it's coming to what you are out of what you thought you were. See, it's a consensus reality. You're given a name when you're born, right? And to that name, you ascribe all of your experiences and so forth and so on, how well you do and so forth and so on. You get trapped within your name, and then the aspirations your mother and father had for you, your name, and you spend your life, trying to be a financier, or a doctor, or a baseball player, or what have you, right? What are you, essentially? We don't know that. I have to stop talking to myself so that my essence can really speak to me. Then I may see that what I'm doing, I don't want to do at all.
Is essence what we really are?
Mm-hmm. It's the original energy of the centers without the influence of the person. And behind that is being, right?
Personality is just a mask?
No, there's a personality that comes from essence and being. But the personality we have is a false personality that we have, that has grown up around us to protect us from the shocks of life and to try to pretend to be this or that or what have you, right? Yeah.
You've mentioned being centered several times. What do you mean by that?
Well, when you're associating, you're in the formatory apparatus, which we take to be the mental center. It's not. The mental center is when the mind, the formatory mind, is quiet. The emotions that we have usually are almost completely influenced by the self-image, the false personality. So when we see people becoming overly dramatic, hysterical, what have you, that's not the emotional center, right? There is the moving center. There is the instinctive center. You suddenly feel something that is going to happen or not. And then there's the sexual center. How many people really have sex? Most people are having head sex, right? Being afraid to merge, right? So it's from the head. And how am I doing or not doing, and so forth and so on. Rather than merging two energy systems, merging in knowledge that they are consciousness, right? That begins on a bodily level and a gender level, but moves to a dynamic level where the gender idea is simply an idea, inasmuch as each of us chromosomally is both male and female. So why should I always be active? Why should I always be receptive? Why can't I be both? Depending on what the situation is. The flow of it, right? So the centers we don't know about. We think we know. So it's only by coming out of the formatory mind, redirecting the attention into the feet, and going through a process, it comes to self-consciousness and then self-remembering, that you begin to know through experience and not through definition what the centers are.
Are the moving, instinctive, and sexual centers distinct centers, or, I don't know, are they the same?
No, they're different, but of course, usually the moving center is involved in the sexual, as far as I know. Doesn't have to be, though. One can have sex, an interchange of energies, just through looking at someone. But we block it out usually. You know, we want people's attention, but when they give it to us, it's an invasion, because I'm not secure enough in my own recognition of what is truly myself. Then it's welcomed. Right? A crucial experience that he relates, one of the crucial experiences, is the jump in the abyss. Mm-hmm. So how do you see that? Did he jump into an abyss or not? Or something else?
I don't think that he went through that experience. I don't think he actually jumped into the abyss.
Well, there's no doubt about it. The first three books have a quality to them that the others don't seem to have for many people, right? But the jump into the abyss, I take as he had completely given himself to his teacher, Don Juan, and he was hypnotized. So when Don Juan said, jump into the abyss, he did jump into the abyss, but not bodily. And it was such a shock that then later he finds himself in Ship's restaurant, remember? Mm-hmm. And he sees this street person who's completely eaten out, who's hardly there. And they recognize each other, and the street person runs away from him because he has, in Castaneda's terms, broken the human mold. He's no longer a human being as we think about being a human being, right? I could have gone on, I've written a book about my experiences with my Don Juan, and I could have gone on writing any number of books about him because I had internalized him to the degree that in experiences I would be able to intuit how he would feel, how he would talk, what have you. And I believe Castaneda tried that and was successful to a degree, but nowhere near what happened in the first three books. But I don't take him as being a failure. I think Don Juan cut him loose, because at a certain point, it's like you were a daughter to a mother and father, and at a certain point, they told you it was time to leave the house in one way or another, to stand on your own feet. It wasn't that you were a failure. It was that you had grown to a level where now you could enter into life yourself. What of value in his life and his books can be of value to us, right? That's why I wrote the book, right? Not to judge him at all. I did see in reading the books and what have you, and coming on to the fact that he was with Aeneas Nin for some time early on, who was a Cuban writer who was a consort of Henry Miller, and a lot of people in the 20s, what have you, had two husbands simultaneously, what have you. And her father she often referred to as Don Juan, and she talked about writing in a dream, taking ordinary reality and giving it a boost so that the dream was more real to her than the actual experiencing. So there's a lot of that in the book. But I believe Don Juan existed. I don't think you could really write the way he wrote just from your own experience, right? That he was really impressed by a being of non-ordinary reality.